They said the hard part was over. They were wrong. The hard part wasn't the bench. It wasn't the gate, or the Tuesday afternoon, or the cough from down the hallway. The hard part was what came after the winning. Because nobody tells you about that part. Nobody warns you that the moment you get everything you fought for, the call, the offer, but at what cost? And if you don't have an answer, we'll take everything from you.
My name is Marcus Jerome Williams, and I almost walked away from the biggest opportunity of my life on a Wednesday afternoon in June, standing in my mother's kitchen while my father slept in the next room. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I was 21 years old. I had just come off the most important football match of my life. I had 3 goals, 1 MVP plaque, 2 European scouting invitations, and a speech that had apparently been recorded on someone's phone and uploaded to the internet while I was still standing on that stage. By the time I got home that night, the video had 40,000 views. By morning, it had 400,000. I didn't sleep, not because of the video, not because of the invitations. I didn't sleep because when I came home from that ceremony, when I walked through our front door with my father beside me, his best jacket still on, that MVP plaque in his hands, I heard him cough. The same cough, the one from January. The one that had a weight to it, and something in me went very still. Let me tell you about the 2 weeks between the championship and the call. The video kept spreading. I won't pretend that didn't matter, it mattered. Because the words I had said on that stage were words I had meant for a room of 200 people, and they ended up in front of 2 million. Comment sections in languages I didn't speak. Shares from accounts I'd never heard of. Someone translated the speech into Portuguese, someone else into French. Coach Holloway's name was in every caption. I won't say I felt nothing about that. I'm not built for false humility. I felt the particular satisfaction of a truth that had been locked in a room finally getting air. I felt it, and I let myself feel it for exactly as long as it deserved, which was about 3 days, and then I put it down. Because my father was not getting better. The doctor used the word chronic in the 2nd week of June. He said it carefully, the way doctors say words they know will land heavy, giving you just enough pause to brace yourself before the weight arrives. Chronic hypertension. Managed but not resolved. The kind of thing that doesn't disappear, it relocates, finds new rooms in the body to occupy. The stress had done something to my father's system that rest alone could not fully undo. He needed consistency. He needed stability. He needed, the doctor said, to avoid significant stressors. I drove home from that appointment and sat in the car in our driveway for 22 minutes before going inside. My father was in his chair by the window. He had his thermos. The television was on, a European League match, one of the big ones, the kind with stadiums that hold 80,000 people and roar like something alive. He looked at me when I came in. He read my face the way he had always read my face, with the precision of a man who had been studying me since I was 4 years old. What did he say? My father asked. He said, "You're doing better," I told him, which was true. It was just not the whole truth. My father nodded slowly and turned back to the match. He didn't push. He never pushed. That was the thing about Harold Williams. He always knew exactly how much room to give you, and he gave it without making you feel the giving. The call came on a Thursday, not an email. Not a message through an agent. I didn't even have an agent yet, which tells you something about how fast everything was moving. A phone call, direct. To my personal number, which I still have no idea how they got, though I have some guesses involving the scouts who had been at the final. The area code was international. I stared at it for 4 full rings before I answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as Henrik Brauer. He spoke English with a precise German accent. The kind of accent that sounds like every word has been chosen deliberately and placed with care. He told me he was the head of youth development and recruitment for FC Dynamo Köln, a Bundesliga club based in Cologne, Germany. He said he had watched footage of the regional championship final. He said he had then watched it again. He said he had shown it to 3 other members of their technical staff, and that all 3 had independently flagged the same things: the decision-making, the composure under pressure, the quality of the finishing, and what he called in a phrase I have thought about many times since: the particular intelligence of a player who has been waiting and has used the waiting well. He said they wanted me to come to Cologne for a 2-week trial with their reserve squad. He said if the trial went the way they expected it to, there would be a contract conversation. He said they would cover all travel and accommodation. And then he waited. I said, "Thank you, Mr. Brower. Can I have 48 hours to think about it?" He said, "Of course." We ended the call. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time looking at the wall. This was it. This was the thing. This was the door that my father had spent 13 years building me toward, not knowing its exact shape, not knowing its exact location, but building me in the direction of something like this. A door that opened onto a life that neither of us had been handed, a life that had to be earned through backyard mornings and paint can cones and years of sitting on a bench in a kit that was never called. I should have felt pure joy. The uncomplicated, cinematic kind, the swelling music, the deep breath, the moment of arrival. Instead, I walked to the doorway of the living room and looked at my father in his chair. The match was still on. He had fallen asleep. His thermos was tilted slightly in his lap, held by one calloused hand even in sleep, like a habit too deep to release. And I thought, if I go to Germany, who is here? I need to explain something about my family because it matters. My mother, Jerome Williams, is a woman who has carried more than her share for as long as I can remember. She works. She has always worked 2 jobs for stretches of my childhood, one job when things were more stable, always something. She is not the kind of woman who complains about this. She is not the kind of woman who makes you feel the weight she carries, because she is too busy carrying it to put it down for display. But she was 51 years old. And my father's illness had added something to what she was already holding. I had a younger sister, Nia, who was 15 and sharp as anything, sharper than me in most ways, which I have always been honest about. But she was 15. If I went to Germany, the house became my mother and my sister and my father in his chair by the window. That was the arithmetic I was doing. Standing in the kitchen, listening to the television murmur in the next room, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with football. I told my mother about the call that evening at dinner. My father was at the table. Nia was at the table. I waited until everyone had food in front of them. I don't know why, some instinct about delivering serious things when people are settled, and then I told them. My mother put her fork down. She looked at me with those eyes she has, the ones that see through the surface of everything and go straight to the thing underneath. Nia said, "Germany, Marcus, that's real." My father said nothing for a moment. He looked at his plate. He picked up his fork. He took one slow bite, and then he said without looking up, "When do they want an answer?" 48 hours, I said. "I have until Saturday morning." He nodded, chewed, swallowed. "Then you have time to think properly," he said. That was all he said at the table. I knew, because I knew this man better than I knew anyone on earth, that it was not all he had to say. But Harold Williams believed in the right time for the right words, and the dinner table with 4 people and 4 plates of food was not his chosen moment. He found me at midnight. I was in the kitchen again. I seemed to make all my important decisions in that kitchen, sitting with a glass of water, not drinking it, just holding it. The way you hold something when your hands need something to do because your mind is too full to direct them. My father came in quietly. He was in his robe. his salt and pepper hair slightly uneven from sleep. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body required more consideration than it used to. He looked at me. I looked at him. And I said before he could speak, because I needed to say it, because it had been sitting in my chest since the phone call, I said, "I don't want to leave you." My father was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed, and then he said, "Marcus, look at me." I looked at him. "I'm sick," he said. "That's true, but I am not dying. And even if I were, which I am not, so listen carefully, even if I were, the worst thing you could do to me is stay." I started to speak. He raised one hand, one of those calloused, earth-feeling hands, and I stopped. "Let me finish," he said. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. The kitchen light caught the lines in his face, the years in them, the work, the particular weariness of a man who has loved something as hard as he has and watched it get used against him and kept loving it anyway. "I didn't spend 13 years in that backyard so you could sit in this kitchen and feel sorry for me," he said. "That is not what those mornings were for. That is not what any of it was for. Dad, I'm not finished. Not harsh, just clear." The way he had always been clear when it mattered. "When I was your age, a door opened for me, not as wide as yours, not with a man calling from Germany, but it opened, and I didn't walk through it. And I have made my peace with that. Don't look at me like that. I have genuinely made my peace. But I made my peace partly because I told myself the door would open again for someone who carried what I carried. And that someone is you." He stopped, took a slow breath. "If you don't walk through that door," he said, "then what they did to us meant something. What they said at that gate, what they did to my health, all of it, it wins. Because the whole point of what they did was to make sure you never got to a door like this. You understand me. I understood him. I had always understood him. I just needed to hear it in his voice at midnight in the kitchen, with him looking at me the way he was looking at me. 'You go,' my father said. 'You go and you make them watch from every corner of the world.' I called Henrik Brouwer on Friday morning, one day early. I told him I would come. He said, 'Good, we'll send the details by end of day.' I said, 'Mr. Brouwer, I need to ask you something.' He said, 'Go ahead.' I said, 'The footage you watched from the championship, did you see the speech?' There was a pause. Then Brouwer said, 'Yes, we saw it.' I said, 'And,' he said very deliberately, 'Mr. Williams, we recruit players, we also recruit people. What you said on that stage told us something about the kind of person you are. That information was relevant to our decision.' I thanked him and ended the call. I went to my father's chair. He was out for his morning walk. The first time in months he had gone out in the morning, which I chose to take as a sign, and I sat in it for a moment. Just sat in the chair where he sat, held the silence of it, felt the shape of what he had built by sitting in it through all those months of recovery. Then I got up and started packing. Cologne in July is a different world from Eastbrook, New Jersey. I want to be precise about this because the difference matters to the story. Eastbrook is manicured and closed, beautiful in a way that is also a kind of warning, a beauty that tells you who it was built for and who it tolerates. Cologne was loud and layered and indifferent to my presence in the way that a real city is indifferent, not hostile, not welcoming, just vast, too busy being itself to have an opinion about you specifically. I arrived on a Tuesday. The FC Dynamo Köln training facility was 40 minutes from the city center, a proper facility, the kind I had only seen in footage. 4 pitches, a gymnasium that smelled like rubber and ambition, a recovery suite. Staff in branded gear, moving with the particular purposefulness of people who believe in what they're doing. A young woman named Lena met me at the entrance. She spoke perfect English and handed me a schedule for the 2 weeks and a key card for the residential accommodation on the training campus. I stood in the doorway of my room that first night, a clean, simple room, single bed, window overlooking one of the training pitches, and I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "I'm here," I said. "Good," he said. "How's the pitch?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. 13 years of backyard mornings, and the first thing he asked about was the pitch. "I'll tell you tomorrow," I said, "after I've seen it properly." "Sleep first," he said. "You'll need everything tomorrow." The first 3 days of the trial nearly broke me. Not because I wasn't good enough. I want to be honest, I knew I was good enough. What I was not prepared for was the level of everyone else being good enough as well. These were not the players of Eastbrook United. These were not regional championship players. These were young men from across Europe and South America and Africa who had been identified early and developed professionally. Players who had been in elite systems since they were 13. Who had never known what it meant to sit on a bench for 2 years, who had spent those years instead receiving coaching, tactical education, physical development, all of it organized and intentional. The reserve squad trained with an intensity that made our regional championship final look like a friendly kickabout. Everything was faster. The spaces were smaller. The decisions had to come earlier because everyone around you was also thinking fast, and slow thinking in that environment was visible and punishing. On day 1, I gave away possession 4 times in the first training session. 4 times. In 2 years on the bench at Eastbrook, I had not given away possession 4 times total. I walked back to my room that evening and sat on the edge of the bed and did something I had not done since I was a teenager. I doubted myself, not the collapsing kind of doubt, not the quitting kind. The specific, surgical kind that my father had taught me to treat as information rather than verdict. What is this doubt telling you? He used to ask, when I was a teenager and something had gone wrong in a match or a drill, and I came home with the weight of it on my face. What specifically is the doubt pointing at? I sat on that bed in Cologne and I did the exercise. I was honest about what had gone wrong. The possession losses were not about skill, they were about tempo adjustment. I was still playing at regional championship speed in a body that needed to be playing at Bundesliga reserve speed. The gap was real and it was specific, and specific gaps can be closed. I called my father. "Talk me through it," he said. I talked him through it. Every possession loss, every decision that had come half a second too late, every moment where I had processed when I should have already been acting. He listened without interrupting. That was his discipline, the listening. He had always been better at listening than most people are at anything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Marcus, do you remember what I told you about Thierry Henry?" I remembered. I had been 14. We had been watching footage on the old laptop. "You told me he spent a year at Juventus where he could barely get a touch," I said. "And then," my father said, "and then he went to Arsenal," I said, "and he became the player he was supposed to be." "The system has to match the player," my father said. "But first, the player has to match the speed of the system. Give it time. Your feet already know what to do. Your brain just needs to catch up to the new pace. It always does. It always has." I said goodnight and lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Your brain just needs to catch up. By day 5, something shifted. Not dramatically, not cinematically. The way real progress happens in small increments that are invisible until they aren't. A through ball completed where I would have hesitated 3 days earlier. A defensive press beaten with a turn I had executed 10,000 times in the backyard, but had been second-guessing in the new environment. A shot first time from the edge of the area that caught the far corner and made one of the German coaches stop his drill and look at me with that specific expression. Not congratulation, just notation. Filed. Noted. Continuing. I trained like a man with something to prove. Which is what I had always been. The other players in the trial group were from 5 different countries. A left back from Senegal named Almer, who was built like a wall and read the game with supernatural calm. A creative midfielder from Brazil named Fabio, who had footwork that made me genuinely stop and watch sometimes. which I tried not to make obvious. A striker from Poland named Kamil who was relentless, not technically gifted in the obvious ways, but simply, indefatigably, always in the right place. We were all trying to earn the same thing. We understood that without having to say it. There was a particular session on day 6, a tactical exercise, small-sided, high intensity, where something clicked between me and Fabio in a way that neither of us had planned. I played a ball into the space behind him, and he read it without looking, spun, and finished before the goalkeeper had moved. He looked at me afterward with this wide grin and said, in English that was better than he pretended it was, "You saw it before I knew I was going there." That was the thing my father had built, not just footwork, not just shooting, vision. The ability to see the pass before the opportunity existed. I called him that night and told him about the session. For the first time since I had arrived in Cologne, I heard him laugh. The problem came in week 2. His name was Dieter Schwarz. He was the reserve team's first-choice attacking midfielder, not in the trial group, an established player, 20 years old, technically brilliant, and absolutely certain that whatever space I was occupying in the training sessions was space that belonged to him. He was not hostile in the obvious way. He was hostile in the way that sophisticated people are hostile, through omission, through the pass that doesn't come when it should, through the comment made in German to the other established players, followed by laughter, with a glance in my direction that made the subject unmistakable. It was familiar. It was a different language, a different country, a different sports surface, but the architecture of it was familiar. I had lived in that architecture for 2 years. I had a choice. The choice I had been given before in a different form. I could react. I could confront him. I could let it get into my game, let it break my concentration, let it become the thing that defined my performance in a 2-week window where every session mattered. Or I could do what my father had taught me without ever specifically teaching it. I could make my presence undeniable and let the undeniability speak. On day 9, there was a practice match. Reserve squad first team against the trial group, mixed. Brouwer watched from the touchline with 2 other members of the technical staff, clipboards, the whole apparatus of professional evaluation. Dieter Schwarz was on my team. For the first 20 minutes, he did not pass to me once. Open, well-positioned, the right option, he found another one. Every time. I watch it happening with the cold clarity of a man who has learned not to personalize what is actually structural. In the 23rd minute, I stopped waiting for his pass. I took a ball from our center back, turned, and played a combination through the midfield that bypassed Dieter entirely, used him as a distraction, cut around him, opened up the left channel with a diagonal that found Almer overlapping. Almer played it back. I was already in the box. I finished first time low near post, 1-0. In the 31st minute, Dieter received the ball in a position where the obvious pass was square to me. He held it. 1 second, 2 seconds. The window closed. He forced a pass into a crowded area. We lost possession. I looked at him. He looked at me. I didn't say anything. I don't do that anymore. I learned from watching my father that the men who require confrontation are the men who need an audience. Take away the audience. Make your answer the play. In the 44th minute, I scored again. This time, the goal came from a movement that required reading Dieter's position, understanding where he would be, where he would not be, using the space his selfishness created as its own kind of opening. He had given me the gap. He just hadn't meant to. At halftime, Brouwer called me aside. He said in that precise, considered way of his, "I have been watching how you manage the dynamic with Schwarz." I said, "There's no dynamic. I'm playing my game." Brouwer looked at me for a moment. Then something almost like a smile moved across his face. "That," he said, "is exactly the correct answer." He walked back to his clipboard. I stood there for a moment and thought of a Tuesday afternoon at a gate. I thought of my father's face, the upright posture, the quiet dignity, the weariness of a man experiencing something he had expected and dreaded. I thought of what it had cost him to carry that with grace. I learned from the best. The call, the second call, the one that actually changed everything, came on the last Friday of the trial. Brower asked me to come to his office after the morning session. His office was clean and sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with tactical diagrams on it, a window overlooking the main pitch. He sat across from me and he placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. "We would like to offer you a contract," he said. 2 years with an option for a third. Salary details are on the page. You would start with the reserve squad with the expectation, based on what we have seen, that you will be pushing for first team consideration within 12 months. I looked at the paper. I looked at the numbers. I had grown up in a house where those numbers would have changed everything, where those numbers would have meant my mother's 2 jobs becoming 1, where those numbers would have meant my father's medical care had a cushion. I looked up at Brower. "I have one condition," I said. Brower raised an eyebrow, not offended, interested. "My father," I said. "When there are home matches, when he is well enough to travel, I need to know there is a seat for him, not behind a fence, not in a general admission section. A proper seat with his name on the reservation." Brower looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That is not a condition. That is a standard courtesy we extend to all players' families." He reached across the desk and picked up the paper. "We'll have the formal contract prepared for next week," he said. "Welcome to FC Dynamo Köln, Mr. Williams." I called my father from the car park outside the training facility. He answered on the second ring. It was always the second ring. "Dad," I said. "Marcus," he said. "I signed," I said. Though I hadn't signed yet, the formal paperwork was a week away, but we both knew what I meant. The decision had been made. The door was open and I had walked through it. There was a silence on the phone, the good kind. The kind that is full rather than empty. Then my father said, "Tell me about the facility." I laughed. I put my face in my hand and laughed in that car park in Cologne, while my father waited patiently on the other end of the line, thermos probably in hand, in his chair by the window, the television on in the background with some match from some league somewhere. "Dad," I said when I could speak again, "the pitches are beautiful." "How many?" he said. "4," I said. "Natural grass, all 4. Another silence, then quietly, "Good, just that, good." The way Harold Williams said things when they mattered most, stripped down to the simplest word that could hold the weight. I flew home 3 days later. My mother picked me up from the airport. She held me at the arrival's gate for a long time, not saying anything, just holding. My mother is not a demonstrative woman. She saves it for when it counts, the way my father saves words. So I held her back and understood that the length of the embrace was a full sentence. Nia was in the back seat of the car on her phone, but she looked up when I got in and said, "Okay, so you're literally going to be a professional footballer." This is actually insane, and went back to her phone, which was her way of saying she was proud of me. My father was at home. He was in his chair, of course he was in his chair, but he was awake, and he had his best jacket on. I noticed that immediately. He had put his best jacket on to sit in his chair and wait for me to come home. I stood in the living room doorway and looked at him in that jacket, and I had to take a breath. "Sit down," he said. "You look like you're about to make a speech." I sat on the sofa across from him. He had his thermos. The television was off, which was unusual. My father almost always had a match on. But the television was off and he was just sitting there in his best jacket waiting. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about Cologne, about the facility and the 4 natural grass pitches and Lena, who met me at the door, and the room with the window overlooking the training ground. I told him about the first 3 days and the possession losses and the self-doubt that had sat on the edge of my bed and the phone call that had talked me back from it. He listened without interrupting. I told him about Fabio from Brazil and Almer from Senegal and Camille from Poland. I told him about Dieter Schwarz and what had happened in the practice match, and how I had used the gap his selfishness created. I told him about Brouwer's office and the sheet of paper on the desk and the numbers on it. I told him about the condition I had asked for. My father was quiet for a long moment after that. "What did he say?" he asked. "He said it wasn't a condition," I said. "He said it was a standard courtesy." My father looked at the window. The afternoon light was coming through it sideways, the way it does in June, long and golden. "Standard courtesy," he said quietly. He said it like a man tasting something he had never tasted before and finding it unexpectedly real. I put the contract signing details on the table, the flight back to Cologne, the date, the formal paperwork. My father looked at it all with the careful attention he had always given to things that mattered, the way he used to study footage on the old laptop, pausing and studying and pausing again. Then he looked at me. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You know what I told you in the backyard, years ago, when you were frustrated about something small? I knew. I had carried it with me through every minute of the last 4 years. The game is longer than the moment you're in," I said. He nodded slowly. "We were in a very long moment," he said, "for a while." "We were," I said. "But we're still here," he said, 3 words, just that. The way Harold Williams summarized the unsummarizable, with the smallest number of words that could carry the full weight without dropping any of it. We're still here. I sat across from my father in our living room in the long June light, and I understood that this was the actual victory. Not the contract, not the goals, not the speech, not the video with 400,000 views, this room. This man in his best jacket. Both of us still here, still whole, still in possession of the thing they had tried to take. There is something I need to say before I end this chapter. People saw that video. People shared it, commented on it, made it into something larger than the room where it happened. And a lot of those comments were about Holloway, about what he deserved, about justice, about consequences. I understand that. I do not entirely disagree with it. But I want to tell you what I have actually thought about. In the months since the ceremony, in the weeks in Cologne, in the quiet of the room with the window overlooking the pitch. I have thought about my father putting his best jacket on to sit in his chair and wait for me. I have thought about my mother's arms at the arrival's gate and the length of the embrace. I have thought about Nia, 15 and sharp and already better than me at most things, who will do whatever she decides to do with that sharpness and that mind, and who will do it knowing that her brother did not quit. I have thought about Henrik Brouwer saying standard courtesy, the specific, ordinary decency of being told that your father's presence at a game is not a negotiation, it is simply a given. These are the things that have stayed with me, not Holloway, not Brett, not the laughter at the gate. They had 2 years of my presence on a bench. They will have the rest of their lives knowing what they did with it. That is enough. That has always been enough. I am 21 years old and I play professional football in Germany. My father has a seat in the family section with his name on the reservation. He brings his thermos. Some habits are not meant to change. I am telling you this story in pieces because that is how it was lived, in pieces, in moments. In the particular long game that Harold Williams taught me in a backyard with paint can cones and a second-hand laptop, and 13 years of evenings that he gave to me so completely that I carry them in my feet every time I step onto a pitch. The call from Europe came, and I almost threw it away, not because I was afraid of it, because I loved my father more than I wanted it, and my father, who had given me everything, who had been made sick by small men with temporary power, who had carried his dignity to a gate where people tried to take it and brought it home still intact. My father looked at me across a kitchen table at midnight and told me that leaving was not abandonment. It was the answer. the only answer that made what they had done mean nothing. So I went, and I will keep going. The game is longer than the moment you're in, always.